Okay. Sit up, please. That night, they began to torture Wesley. Count Rugen did the actual pain-inducing. The prince simply sat by, asking questions out loud, inwardly admiring the count's skill. The count really cared about pain. The whys behind the screams interested him fully as much as the anguish itself. And whereas the prince spent his life in physically following the hunt, Count Rugen read and studied anything he could get his hands on dealing with the subject of distress. "All right now," the prince said to Wesley, who lay in the great fifth-level cage. "Before we begin, I want you to answer me this. Have you any complaints about your treatment thus far?" "None whatsoever," Wesley replied, and in truth he had none. Oh, he might have preferred being unchained a bit now and then, but if you were to be a captive, you couldn't ask for more than he had been given. The albino's medical ministrations had been precise, and his shoulder was fine again. The food the albino brought had always been hot and nourishing, the wine and brandy wonderfully warming against the darkness of the underground cage. "You feel fit, then?" the prince went on. "I assume my legs are a little stiff from being chained, but other than that, yes." "Good. Then I promise you this, as God himself is my witness. Answer the next question, and I will set you free this night. But you must answer it honestly, fully, withholding nothing. If you lie, I will know, and then I'll loose the count on you." "I have nothing to hide," Wesley said. "Ask away." "Who hired you to kidnap the princess?" "It was someone from Gilder. We found fabric indicating as much on the princess's horse. Tell me that man's name, and you are free. Speak." "No one hired me," Wesley said. "I was working strictly freelance, and I didn't kidnap her. I saved her from others who were doing that very thing." "You seem a reasonable fellow, and my princess claims to have known you many years, so I will give you, on her account, one last and final chance. The name of the man in Gilder who hired you. Tell me, or face torture." "No one hired me. I swear." The count set fire to Wesley's hands. Nothing permanent or disabling. He just dipped Wesley's hands in oil and brought a candle close enough to set things bubbling. When Wesley had screamed, "No one, no one, no one on my life!" a sufficient number of times, the count dipped Wesley's hands in water, and he and the prince left via the underground entrance, leaving the medication to the albino, who was always nearby during the torturing times, but never visible enough to be distracting. "I feel quite invigorated," the count said, as he and the prince began to ascend the underground staircase. "It's a perfect question." He was telling the truth, clearly. We both know that. The prince nodded. The count was privy to all his innermost plans for the revenge war. "I'm fascinated to see what happens," the count went on. "Which pain will be least endurable, the physical or the mental anguish of having freedom offered if the truth is told, and then telling it and being thought a liar?" "I think the physical," said the prince. "I think you're wrong," said the count. Actually, they were both wrong. Wesley suffered not at all throughout. His screaming was totally a performance to please them. He had been practicing his defenses for a month now, and he was more than ready. The minute the count brought the candle close, Wesley raised his eyes to the ceiling, dropped his eyelids over them, and in a state of deep and steady concentration, he took his brain away. Buttercup was what he thought of, her autumn hair, her perfect skin, and he brought her very close beside him and had her whisper in his ear throughout the burning, "I love you. I love you. I only left you in the fire swamp to test your love for me. Is it as great as mine for you? Can two such loves exist on one planet at one time? Is there that much room, beloved Wesley?" The albino bandaged his fingers. Wesley lay still. For the first time, the albino started things. Whispered, "You better tell them." From Wesley, a shrug. Whispered, "They never stop. Not once they start. Tell them that they want to know and have done with it." Shrug. Whispered, "The machine is nearly ready. They're testing it on animals now." Shrug. Whispered, "For your own good, I tell you these things." "My own good? What good? They're going to kill me anyway." From the albino. Nod. The prince found Buttercup waiting unhappily outside his chamber door. "It's my letter," she began. "I cannot make it right." Come in," the prince said gently. "Maybe we can help you."
I think the prince is going to have a bad time. A bad time. You want to have a bad time?
She sat down in the same chair as before.
Bad
"All right,
time.
I'll close my eyes and listen. Read to me." Wesley, my passion, my sweet, my only, my own, come back, come back. I shall kill myself otherwise. Yours in torment, Buttercup. She looked at Humperdinck. Well, do you think I'm throwing myself at him? It does seem a bit forward, the prince admitted. It doesn't leave him a great deal of room to maneuver. Will you help me to improve it, please? I'll do what I can, sweet lady, but first it might help if I knew just a bit about him. Is he really so wonderful, this Wesley of yours? Not so much wonderful as perfect, she replied. Kind of flawless, more or less magnificent, without blemish, rather on the ideal side. She looked at the prince. Am I being helpful? I think emotions are clouding your objectivity just a bit. Do you actually think that there's nothing the fellow can't do? Buttercup thought for a while. It's not so much that there's nothing he can't do. It's more that he can do it all better than anybody else can do it. The prince chuckled and smiled. In other words, for example, you mean if he wanted to hunt, he could out-hunt, again, for example, someone such as myself. Oh, I think if he wanted to, he could, quite easily, but he happens not to like hunting, at least to my knowledge. Though maybe he does, I don't know. I never knew he was so interested in mountain climbing, but he scaled the cliffs of insanity under most adverse conditions, and everyone agrees that it's not the easiest thing in the world to accomplish. Well, why don't we just begin our letter with Divine Wesley, and appeal to his sense of modesty, the prince suggested. Buttercup began to write. Stopped. Does divine begin D-E or D-I? D-I, I believe, amazing creature, the prince replied, smiling gently as Buttercup commenced the letter. They composed it in 4 hours, and many times she said, I would never get through this without you. And the prince was always most modest, asking little helpful personal questions about Wesley as often as was possible without drawing attention to it. And in this way, well before dawn, she told him, smiling as she remembered, of Wesley's early fears of spinning ticks. And that night, in the 5th level cage, the prince asked, as he was always to ask, Tell me the name of the man in Gilder who hired you to kidnap the princess, and I promise you immediate freedom. And Wesley replied, as he was always to reply, No one. No one, I was alone. And the count, who had spent the day getting the spinners ready, placed them carefully on Wesley's skin. And Wesley closed his eyes and begged and pleaded, and after an hour or so the prince and count left, the albino remaining behind with the chore of burning the spinners and then pulling them free from Wesley, lest they accidentally poison him. And on the way up the underground stairs to ground level, the prince said, just for conversation's sake, Much better, don't you think? The count, oddly, said nothing. Which was vaguely irritating to Humperdinck, because, to tell the absolute truth, torture was never all that high on his scale of passions, and he would just as soon have disposed of Wesley right then. If only Buttercup would admit that he, Humperdinck, was the better man. But she would not. She simply would not. All she ever talked about was Wesley. All she ever asked about was news of Wesley. Days went by. Weeks went by. Party after party went by, and all Florin was moved by the spectacle of their great hunting prince at last, so clearly and wonderfully in love. But when they were alone, all she ever said was, I wonder where could Wesley be? What could be taking him so long? How can I live until he comes? Maddening. So each night the count's discomforts, which made Wesley writhe and twist, were really sort of all right. The prince would manage an hour or so of spectating before he and the count would leave. The count still oddly silent. And down below, tending the wounds, the albino would whisper, Tell them, please. They will only add to your suffering. Wesley could barely suppress his smile. He had felt no pain. Not once, none. He had closed his eyes and taken his brain away. That was the secret. If you could take your brain away from the present and send it to where it could contemplate skin like wintry cream, well, let them enjoy themselves. His revenge time would come. Wesley was living now most of all for Buttercup, but there was no denying that there was one more thing he wanted too. His time. Prince Humperdinck simply had no time. There seemed to be not one decision in all of Florin that one way or another didn't eventually come heavily to rest upon his shoulders. Not only was he getting married, his country was having its 500th anniversary. Not only was he noodling around in his mind the best way to get a war going, he also had to constantly have affection shining from his eyes. Every detail had to be met, and met correctly. His father was no help at all, refusing either to expire or stop mumbling. You thought his father was dead, but that was just in the fake-out. Don't forget, Morgenstern was just edging into the nightmare sequence, so don't be confused. and start making sense. Queen Bella simply hovered around him, translating here and there, and it was with a shock that Prince Humperdinck realized just 12 days before his wedding day that he had neglected to set in motion the crucial Gilder section of his plan, so he called Yellen to the castle late one night. Yellen was chief of all enforcement in Florin City, a job he had inherited from his father. The albino keeper at the zoo was Yellen's first cousin, and together they formed the only pair of non-nobles the prince could come close to trusting. "Your Highness," Yellen said. He was small but crafty, with darting eyes and slippery hands. Prince Humperdinck came out from behind his desk. He moved closely to Yellen and looked carefully around before saying, softly, "I have heard from unimpeachable sources that many men of Gilder have of late begun to infiltrate our thieves' quarter. They're disguised as Florinese, and I am worried." "I've heard nothing of such a thing," Yellen said. "A prince has spies everywhere." "I understand," said Yellen, "and you think since the evidence points that they tried to kidnap your fiancé once, such a thing might happen again?" "It's a possibility." "I'll close off the thieves' quarter then," Yellen said. "No one will enter and no one will leave." "Not good enough," said the prince. "I want the thieves' quarter emptied and every villain jailed until I'm safely on my honeymoon." Yellen did not nod quickly enough, so the prince said, "State your problem." "My men are not always too happy at the thought of entering the thieves' quarter. Many of the thieves resist change. Root them out. Form a brute squad, but get it done." "It takes at least a week to get a decent brute squad going," Yellen said, "but that is time enough." He bowed and started to leave. And that was when the scream began. Yellen had heard many things in his life, but nothing quite so eerie as this. He was a brave man, but this sound frightened him. It was not human, but he couldn't guess the throat of the beast it came from. It was actually a wild dog on the first level of the zoo, but no wild dog had ever shrieked like that before. But then, no wild dog had ever been put in the machine. The sound grew in anguish, and it filled the night sky as it spread across the castle grounds, over the walls, even into the great square beyond. It would not stop. It simply hung now below the sky, an audible reminder of the existence of agony. In the great square, half a dozen children screamed back at the night, trying to blot out the sound. Some wept, some only ran for home. Then it began to lessen in volume. Now it was hard to hear in the great square. Now it was gone. Now it was hard to hear on the castle walls. Now it was gone from the castle walls. It shrunk across the grounds toward the first level of the Zoo of Death, where Count Rugen sat fiddling with some knobs. The wild dog died. Count Rugen rose, and it was all he could do to bury his own shriek of triumph. He left the zoo and ran towards Prince Humperdinck's chambers. Yellen was just going when the Count got there. The prince was seated now behind his desk. When Yellen was gone and they were alone, the Count bowed to his majesty. "The machine," he said at last, "works."
They killed a doggo?
"Oh yeah, they're terrible."
"I am going to destroy them."
It's fine to torture Wesley, but no killing doggos. Prince Humperdinck took a while before answering.
Like, it's something that a typical bad guy would do. But a doggo? That doggo was doing doggo. You do not kill doggo.
Can I read now?
Yes.
Okay. It was a ticklish situation. Granted, he was the boss, the Count merely an underling. Still, no one in all Florin had Rugen's skills. As an inventor, he had obviously, at last, rid the machine of all defects. As an architect, he had been crucial in the safety factors involved in the Zoo of Death, and it had been undeniably been Rugen who had arranged for the only survivable entrance being the underground 5th level one. He was also supportive to the prince in all endeavors of hunting and battle. And you didn't give a follower like that a quick, "Get away, boy, you bother me." So the prince indeed took a while. "Look, Ty," he said finally, "I'm just thrilled you smoothed all the bugs out of the machine. I never for a minute doubted you'd get it right eventually. And I'm really anxious as can be to see it working, but how can I put this? I can't keep my head above water one minute to the next. It's not just the parties and the goo-gooing with what's-her-name. I've got to decide how long the 500th anniversary parade is going to be, and where does it start, and when does it start, and which nobleman gets to march in front of which other nobleman so that everyone's still speaking to me at the end of it. Plus, I've got a wife to murder and a country to frame for it. Plus, I've got to get the war going once it's all happened, and all this is stuff I've got to do myself. Here's what it all comes down to. I'm just swamped, Ty. So how about if you go to work on Wesley and tell me how it goes, and when I get the time, I'll come watch, and I'm sure it'll be just wonderful. But for now, what I'd like is a little breathing room. No hard feelings?" Count Rugen smiled. None. And there weren't any. He always felt better when he could dole out pain alone. You could concentrate much more deeply when you were alone with agony. "I knew you'd understand, Ty." There was a knock on the door, and Buttercup stuck her head in. "Any news?" she said. The prince smiled at her and sadly shook his head. "Honey, I promise to tell you the second I hear a thing. It's only 12 days, though." "Plenty of time, Dulcet darling. Now, don't worry yourself." "I'll leave you," Buttercup said. "I was going too," the count said. "May I walk you to your quarters?" Buttercup nodded, and down the corridors they wandered till they reached her suite. "Good night," Buttercup said quickly. Ever since that day he had first come to her father's farm, she had always been afraid whenever the count came near. "I'm sure he'll come," the count said. He was privy to all the prince's plans, and Buttercup was well aware of this. "I don't know your fellow well, but he impressed me greatly. Any man who can find his way through the fire swamp can find his way to Florin Castle before your wedding day." Buttercup nodded. "He seems so strong, so remarkably powerful," the count went on, his voice warm and lulling. "I only wonder if he possessed true sensitivity, as some men of great might, as you know, do not. For example, I wonder, is he capable of tears?" "Wesley would never cry," Buttercup answered, opening her chamber door, "except for the death of a loved one." It sounds to me like Wesley has some toxic masculinity. And with that, she closed the count away, and alone.
What does that mean?
It means that he's been taught to be a man in a way that's bad for him. And bad for men in general. And bad for the world.
Well, I mean, he had to train himself to save Buttercup, so...
So probably a lot of bad things happened to him. But I am just saying, if someone would never cry, that's bottling those feelings up inside. Is that good for you?
No, he's just resisting...
Crying isn't weak, buddy, and it doesn't keep you from doing what needs to be done.
No, I know. It's just... I think he's just beyond that point.
Oh.
He's just trained so much.
Maybe. Can I keep reading now? Okay.
I mean, if he can kind of be closer to Sandy.
And with that, she closed the count away and alone went to her bed and knelt. "Wesley," she thought then, "do come, please. I have begged you in my thoughts now these many weeks, and still no word. Hey, babe. I'm actually really worried that you're going to get glue everywhere. Are you being careful with that?"
I'm just trying to get the glue off.
Okay. "Back when we were on the farm, I thought I loved you, but that was not love. When I saw your face behind the mask on the ravine floor, I thought I loved you, but that was again nothing more than deep infatuation. Beloved, I think I love you now, and I pray you only give me the chance to spend my life in constant proving. I could spend my life in the fire swamp and sing from morn till night if you were by me. I could spend eternity sinking down through snow sand if my hand held your hand. My preference would be to last eternity with you beside me on a cloud, but hell would also be a lark if Wesley was with me." She went on that way, silent hour after silent hour. "Yep! You're going to end up with glue on the table."
I don't know.
Put it right there. Silent hour after silent hour. She'd done nothing else for 38 evenings now, and each time her ardor deepened, her thoughts became more pure. Wesley, Wesley, flying across the 7 seas to claim her. For his part, and quite without knowing, Wesley was spending his evenings in much the same fashion. After the torture was done, when the albino had finished tending his slashes or burns or breaks, when he was alone in the giant cage, he sent his brain to Buttercup, and there it dwelled. He understood her so well. In his mind, he realized that moment he left her on the farm when she swore love. Certainly she meant it, but she was barely 18. What did she know of the depth of her heart? Then again, when he had removed his black mask and she had tumbled to him, surprise had been operating, stunned astonishment as much as emotion. But just as he knew that the sun was obliged to rise each morning in the east, no matter how much a western arisal might have pleased it, so he knew that Buttercup was obliged to spend her love on him. Gold was inviting. Hold on. Gold was inviting, and so was royalty. But they could not match the fever in his heart, and sooner or later she would have to catch it. She had less choice than the sun. So when the Count appeared with the machine, Wesley was not particularly perturbed. As a matter of fact, he had no idea what the Count was bringing with him into the giant cage. As a matter of absolute fact, the Count was bringing nothing. It was the albino who was doing the actual work, making trip after trip with thing after thing. That was what it really looked like to Wesley. Things. Little soft-rimmed cups of various sizes, and a wheel, most likely, and another object that could turn out to be either a lever or a stick. It was hard to tell. "A good evening to you," the Count began. He had never, to Wesley's memory, shown such excitement. Wesley made a very weak nod in return. Actually, he felt about as well as ever, but it didn't do to let that kind of news get around. "Feeling a bit under the weather?" the Count asked. Wesley made another feeble nod. The albino scurried in and out, bringing more things, wire-like extensions, stringy and endless. "That will be all," the Count said finally.
Does Wesley die?
Nod. Gone. "This is the machine," the Count said when they were alone. "I spent 11 years constructing it. As you can tell, I'm rather excited and proud." Wesley managed an affirmative blink. "I'll be putting it together for a while," and with that he got busy. Wesley watched the construction with a good deal of interest and, logically enough, curiosity. "You heard that scream a bit earlier on this evening?" Another affirmative blink. "That was a wild dog. This machine caused the sound." It was a very complex job the Count was doing, but the 6 fingers on his right hand never for a moment seemed in doubt as to just what to do. Did you just hear that? I'm very interested in pain," the Count said, "as I'm sure you've gathered these past months. In an intellectual way, actually. I've written, of course, for the more learned journals on the subject. Articles, mostly. Callie, stop barking. At the present, I'm engaged in writing a book. My book. The book, I hope. The definitive work on pain, at least as we know it now." Wesley found the whole thing fascinating. He made a little groan. "I think pain is the most underrated emotion available to us," the Count said. "The serpent, to my interpretation, was pain. Pain has been with us always, and it always irritates me when people say as important as life and death, because the proper phrase, to my mind, should be as important as pain and death." The Count fell silent for a time then, as he began and completed a series of complex adjustments. "One of my theories," he said somewhat later, "is that pain involves anticipation. Nothing original, I admit, but I'm going to demonstrate to you what I mean. I will not, underline not, use the machine on you this evening. I could. It's ready and tested. But instead, I will simply erect it and leave it beside you for you to stare at the next 24 hours, wondering just what it is and how it works, and can it really be as dreadful as all that?" He tightened some things here, loosened some more over there, tugged and patted and shaped. The machine looked so silly, Wesley was tempted to giggle. Instead, he groaned again. "I'll leave you to your imagination, then," the Count said, and he looked at Wesley.
Mom, can I go put this in the microwave to heat?
"Yep. But I want you to know one thing before tomorrow night happens to you, and I mean it. You are the strongest, the most brilliant and brave, the most altogether worthy creature it has ever been my privilege to meet. And I feel almost sad that, for the purposes of my book and future pain scholars, I must destroy you." "Thank you," Wesley breathed softly. The Count went to the cage door and said over his shoulder, "And you can stop all your performing about how weak and beaten you are. You haven't fooled me for a month. You're practically as strong now as on the day you entered the fire swamp. I know your secret, if that's any consolation to you." "Secret?" Hushed, strained. "You've been taking your brain away," the Count cried. "You haven't felt the least discomfort in all these months. You raise your eyes and drop your eyelids, and then you're off, probably with, I don't know, her, most likely. Good night now."
Can I eat this extra?
On the table there. "Try and sleep. I doubt you'll be able to. Anticipation, remember?" With a wave, he mounted the underground stairs. Wesley could feel the sudden pressure of his heart. Soon the albino came, knelt by bacon on the floor, knelt by Wesley's ear, whispered, "I've been watching you all these days. You deserve better than what's coming. I'm needed. No one else feeds the beasts as I do. I'm safe. They won't hurt me. I'll kill you if you'd like. That would foil them. I've got some good poison. I beg you. I've seen the machine. I was there when the wild dog screamed, please, let me kill you. You'll thank me, I swear. I must live. Whispered, but... Interruption. They will not reach me. I'm all right. I'm fine. I'm alive, and I will stay that way. He said the words loud, and he said them with passion. But for the first time in a long time, there was terror.